Most people don't realize they're wasting their life until there's almost none left to waste. My name is Halley, and I am 88 years old, and there are things I wish someone had forced me to see much earlier. Things I kept doing for decades without understanding the cost, and by the time I finally understood them, most of my life had already passed me by. I wasn't always this reflective man you hear now. I was busy, like everyone else, busy trying to build something, prove something, become someone. When I was younger, I believed life was long, that there would always be time to fix things later, to say what needed to be said, to become the person I imagined I would one day be. But time doesn't move the way we think it does. It doesn't slow down when you need it, and it doesn't wait for you to be ready. I grew up in a small house with very little, but I had people around me who cared. Back then, I didn't think much about it. I thought life would just continue like that the people I loved would always be there, that I would always have another chance to sit with them, to listen, to understand them better. But life has a quiet way of taking things from you while you're distracted with other concerns. When I was in my 30s, I became obsessed with work. I told myself it was necessary, that I was doing it for my family, that one day it would all make sense. I missed dinners. I missed conversations. I missed moments that didn't seem important at the time. I remember my wife once asked me to sit with her on the porch one evening. It was nothing special, just a quiet sunset. But I told her I was too busy. I don't even remember what I was working on that day, but I remember her face when I said no. That's the strange thing about life. You forget the things you thought were important, and you remember the moments you dismissed. For many years, I believed I had control over everything. I thought if I worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, avoided mistakes, I could shape life exactly the way I wanted. But life doesn't respond to control the way we expect. It slips through your hands, quietly, without asking for permission. I also spent too much time worrying about what other people thought of me. It sounds small when you say it out loud, but it becomes a heavy burden over time. I chose paths that didn't feel right because they looked right to others. I stayed silent when I should have spoken, and I spoke when I should have stayed quiet. I adjusted myself to fit expectations that, in the end, didn't matter at all. And then there was anger. I held on to it longer than I should have. Small arguments, misunderstandings, things that could have been resolved with a simple conversation, I let them grow inside me. I told myself I was right, that I had been wronged, that time would justify me. But time doesn't justify anything. It only reveals what you've lost. There were people I stopped talking to over things I can barely remember now. Years passed. Pride kept me from reaching out. And one day, I realized there would be no more chances to fix it. That silence becomes permanent faster than you think. I also postponed happiness in ways that felt reasonable at the time. I told myself I would rest later, enjoy life later, travel later, reconnect later. Later became a habit. It became a promise I kept making to myself without ever fulfilling it. And then one day I realized later had turned into never. You don't notice it happening. Life doesn't announce that you've crossed some invisible line. It just quietly changes. Your energy shifts, your body slows, your world becomes smaller. The things you thought you would eventually do begin to feel out of reach, not because they are impossible, but because the time you assumed you had is no longer there. I spent years trying to be perfect, not in an obvious way, but in the small decisions, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to maintain an image, trying to keep everything in order. But perfection is a quiet trap. It keeps you from living fully because you're always holding back, always adjusting, always afraid of getting something wrong. Looking back, the moments that mattered most were never perfect. They were messy, unplanned, sometimes uncomfortable, but real. And real is what stays with you. There was also a kind of fear that followed me for much of my life. Not a loud fear, not something that stopped me completely, but a quiet hesitation. The kind that makes you wait a little longer, think a little more, delay a decision just enough that the opportunity passes. I convinced myself I was being careful, responsible, thoughtful, but often I was just afraid. I remember a time when I had the chance to change my life completely. A different path, a different place, something that felt uncertain but meaningful. I hesitated. I thought about the risks, the consequences, what people would say. I told myself I would decide later. That later never came. You don't always regret the things you did. More often, you regret the things you didn't allow yourself to do. Another thing I carried for too long was the belief that I had to handle everything on my own. I didn't ask for help, didn't share my struggles, didn't let people see when I was lost. I thought it made me strong, but it only made me distant. It created space between me and the people who would have stood beside me if I had just let them. There is a kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from not allowing yourself to be known. I lived with that for years without even realizing it. And then there was time itself. I treated it like something I had plenty of. I spent it carelessly, assuming there would always be more. I delayed conversations, postponed visits, ignored small moments that didn't seem urgent. But time is not something you can store or recover. Once it passes, it becomes something you can only remember, never relive. Now at 88, my days are quieter. There is more space to think, more space to remember. And in that space, certain things become very clear. Not all at once, not in a dramatic way, but slowly, like a picture coming into focus. I see now that much of what I thought mattered didn't. The pressure, the expectations, the endless effort to control outcomes, it all fades. What remains are the moments you were present, the people you truly connected with, the times you allowed yourself to be honest and open. I think about my wife often, about that evening on the porch, about all the small invitations I declined without understanding their value. If I could go back, I wouldn't change everything. Life doesn't work that way. But I would sit down more often. I would listen more carefully. I would choose presence over productivity when it mattered most. I also think about the words I didn't say, the apologies I delayed, the gratitude I assumed was understood, the love I felt but didn't always express clearly. We assume people know how we feel. Sometimes they do, but hearing it matters more than we realize. There is a quiet kind of regret that comes from knowing you had the chance to say something meaningful and chose not to. It doesn't shout. It stays with you, gently, persistently. I am not telling you these things to make you feel guilty or afraid. That would be useless. Life is not about avoiding every mistake. That's impossible. But there are patterns, habits, ways of living that slowly take more from you than they give. And the danger is not that they hurt you immediately, but that they feel normal. If you are always busy, always distracted, always postponing what matters, it feels like life is moving forward. But sometimes you are just moving away from what truly matters without realizing it. At this age, I don't have the illusion of endless time anymore. I see things as they are. Each day is simple. Each moment is clear. And in that clarity, I understand something I didn't understand before. Life is not waiting for you to figure everything out. It is happening now, in the middle of your uncertainty, your imperfections, your unfinished plans, and the things you keep pushing aside, the conversations, the connections, the small, quiet moments. Those are not distractions from life. They are life. If I could sit across from you, really sit with you the way I should have done more often in my own life, I wouldn't give you a long list of instructions. I would just tell you this. Pay attention to what you are repeatedly ignoring. Notice where you are choosing comfort over truth. See where you are delaying something that matters. And ask yourself honestly how long you think you can keep doing that before the opportunity quietly disappears. Because one day, without any warning, you will look back the way I do now, and you will not be thinking about the things you completed or controlled or perfected. You will be thinking about the moments you missed, the people you didn't fully show up for, the parts of life you assumed would always be there. And in that moment, what you will want more than anything is not more time in general, but more time for the things you once considered small. So while you still can, don't wait for clarity. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you feel ready. Just begin to live a little more honestly, a little more present, a little less afraid. Because time is not something you lose all at once. It is something you slowly give away, day by day, until one day there is almost nothing left to give.